Dr. Lillian Carter, a compassionate veterinarian known for her dedication to animals, was finishing another long day at her small-town clinic. As the evening sun cast its golden glow through the clinic's windows, she prepared to close up. But, just as she was about to lock the door, a commotion outside caught her attention. A scruffy-looking man stumbled into the clinic, cradling a puppy in his arms. His clothes were dirty and tattered, his eyes wild with desperation. "Please, Doc. You've got to help him," he pleaded, his voice trembling. "Found him near the old Hayes place, all alone and hurt." The mention of the Hayes place sent a chill down Lillian's spine. It was a name everyone in town whispered about, ever since the tragic fire 2 weeks ago that had reduced the house to ashes. A fire that claimed the lives of the Hayes family, all except for young Tommy, who remained missing. Lillian's gaze shifted to the puppy. It was a tiny, trembling creature with matted fur and a haunted look in its eyes. But what caught her attention most was the peculiar pendant hanging from its neck, a silver locket engraved with the initials TH. Her hands trembled as she gently took the puppy from the man. "Where exactly did you find him?" "Near the woods, just by what's left of the house." "Poor thing was yelping like crazy," the man replied, his eyes darting around nervously. "I didn't know what to do, so I brought him here." Lillian nodded, her mind racing. The Hayes house was supposed to be abandoned, a charred and lifeless ruin. Yet here was this puppy, somehow connected to the tragedy that had shaken the entire town. "I'll take care of him," Lillian assured the man. "Thank you for bringing him to me." As she carried the puppy to the examination room, she couldn't shake the feeling that this small creature was more than just a lost animal. It was a clue, a living, breathing fragment of a mystery everyone else had already given up on, and Lillian wasn't about to let it slip away. Daniel's sleep was shattered by the same nightmare. Flames, fiery, orange, and vicious, climbed walls he somehow recognized but couldn't place. The heat was stifling, too vivid to be just a dream. Then a woman's voice cut through the chaos. "Daniel! Danny! Where are you?" Panic and love intertwined in that voice, his mother's voice, and then the barking, high-pitched and frantic, a puppy's cries, desperate and afraid. It sounded so much like the puppy he'd seen today. Daniel reached for it through the smoke, but his hands found nothing. With a gasp, he jolted awake, sweat clinging to his skin. The clock read 3:17 a.m. "Just a dream," he whispered, but the words felt empty. The terror had been too real, the details too precise. Across town, Lillian sat hunched over her kitchen table, surrounded by documents and the pale glow of her laptop. The mystery of Daniel Hayes gnawed at her, keeping sleep at bay. The puppy she'd found lay curled up nearby, occasionally whimpering in its sleep. She'd spent hours making calls to foster agencies and group homes, trying to piece together Daniel's fragmented past. But something didn't add up. "This can't be right," she muttered, scrolling through the files a sympathetic social worker had sent her. Daniel's first documented placement was at age 7. But there's nothing before that. No birth certificate, no medical history, just nothing. The date of his first placement caught her eye. 2 weeks after the fire. Lillian leaned back, her coffee cold and forgotten. The puzzle pieces were beginning to form a grim picture. She'd studied trauma-related memory loss during her psychology courses in vet school. Children who experienced severe trauma could sometimes lock away entire portions of their lives. "He doesn't remember because he can't," she murmured. "He's buried it all." The puppy whimpered in its sleep, a small noise that broke through her thoughts. Her gaze drifted to Daniel's reaction to the dog earlier, the way his hands had trembled when he held it. The recognition that had flared in his eyes. By morning, Lillian had made a decision. She needed to talk to Daniel. The sun rose slowly over the construction site as Lillian parked her truck. The puppy, restless in the passenger seat, barked anxiously, as if sensing the tension. She'd found out where Daniel worked through some careful questioning at the shelter. A carpenter for a local construction company. The irony wasn't lost on her, a man who had lost his home to fire now building homes for others. "Daniel," she called, spotting him among the workers measuring boards for a house frame. He looked up, surprise flickering across his face. Before she could say anything else, the puppy bolted from the truck, racing toward Daniel. It danced around his boots, letting out delighted yips, its tail wagging furiously. Daniel froze, his hands clenching at his sides. Then, without realizing it, he dropped to one knee, reaching for the puppy. "Hey, little guy," he murmured, his voice choked with emotion. The puppy pressed against his hand, licking his fingers with frantic devotion. Lillian watched, her breath catching in her throat, as Daniel began to hum. A soft, almost inaudible melody. A lullaby. "That's a beautiful song," Lillian said gently. Daniel blinked, the trance-like calm slipping from his face. "What song?" "The one you were just humming." I wasn't." His brow furrowed, confusion clouding his gaze. The puppy whimpered, nuzzling closer to him. "Daniel, I think this puppy might be able to help you remember things," Lillian said, her voice steady but urgent. "Things from before." He stiffened. "I told you, there's nothing to remember." "Then what's the harm in trying? Just one night. See how it feels." His eyes flickered between Lillian and the puppy, uncertainty shadowing his face. At last, he nodded. "One night, just to prove there's nothing there." They gathered some basic supplies from her truck, food, a blanket, a couple of toys. As Daniel guided the puppy to his car, Lillian noticed how naturally they moved together. Like two pieces of a puzzle reconnecting after years apart. That night, Daniel sat on his old leather couch, the television droning in the background. The puppy lay curled up beside him, its small body radiating warmth. Without thinking, his hand stroked its fur, the motion automatic, soothing. "You're not giving up, are you?" he whispered, scratching behind the dog's ears. The puppy looked up at him with eyes that seemed to hold 1,000 memories. Daniel's eyelids grew heavy, his body sinking deeper into the couch's embrace. As he drifted off, the world around him shifted. He was small, so much smaller. Sunlight spilled through a kitchen window, painting golden patterns across the floor. The air carried the scent of maple syrup and coffee. And there, in the kitchen, stood his mother, her dark hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, flipping pancakes with practiced grace. "Danny, breakfast!" she called out, her voice like a melody. His mother's smile, his father's laugh, the scuttling of tiny paws across the floor. A puppy bounding toward him, its tail wagging madly. Lucky. But warmth turned to heat, and the fire was back. Daniel shot upright, his chest heaving, tears wetting his cheeks. The puppy at his side whimpered, nuzzling against him as if trying to comfort him. "I remember," Daniel whispered, his hands shaking. "I remember everything." The pieces of his past were finally coming together. But the puzzle was far from complete. By the time he had recovered, he had built an entirely new life. New name, new identity, new everything. Tom leaned back, his expression troubled. "Last I heard, he was living up in Cedar Grove, about 3 hours north. Calls himself James Morton now." Daniel's voice was thick with emotion. "But why? Why wouldn't he come forward?" Tom's gaze softened. "Some men carry guilt too heavy to face. Maybe saving you but not being able to save your family. Maybe that was his burden to bear." Lillian scribbled down the information, her mind already racing to plan their next move. "Cedar Grove," she repeated. "We could be there by afternoon." Daniel nodded, his face set with determination. "I need to meet him." I need to understand. They thanked Tom Reynolds, who grabbed Daniel's arm before they left. Whatever you find up there, remember this. Sometimes good men make hard choices for reasons we may never truly understand. As they walked to Lillian's car, Daniel's steps were purposeful, driven by a renewed sense of direction. They had a name, a place, and perhaps, finally, answers waiting in Cedar Grove. The Cedar Grove care home looked peaceful and serene under the late afternoon sun. Flower beds lined the walkway, and rocking chairs swayed gently on the wide front porch. Lillian glanced at Daniel, who sat frozen in the passenger seat, his hands clenched tightly in his lap. "Are you ready?" she asked softly. "I've waited 25 years without knowing. Now that I'm here." Daniel's voice quivered. "What if he doesn't want to see me?" "Let me talk to him first," Lillian suggested gently. "Sometimes, big news needs a careful introduction." Inside, the air smelled of fresh coffee and pine cleaner. A kind-faced nurse directed them to a sunny sitting room where Elliot Grayson spent most of his afternoons. Lillian asked Daniel to wait in the hallway as she approached the elderly man, seated by the window. He was thin, with silver hair and weathered hands resting on a worn book. His eyes, despite their age, still held a sharpness as they met hers. "Mr. Grayson?" Lillian's voice was gentle. "I'm Dr. Lillian Carter. I was hoping we could talk about a fire you responded to 25 years ago." Elliot's hands tightened around his book. "I was a firefighter for 30 years, ma'am. There were many fires. This one was special," Lillian said quietly. "You saved a little boy. The Hayes fire." The color drained from Elliot's face. He set the book aside, his hands trembling. "How did you—" "The boy you saved that night," Lillian continued. "He's here, right outside that door." Fear flickered across Elliot's face, mingling with surprise. I don't know if I can—" "What is it?" Lillian asked, her voice filled with concern. "After that night, I hit my head badly getting out, lost pieces of my memory." His voice cracked. "I remember pulling him out, but everything else is fragments. I couldn't face anyone, not knowing if I could have done more." Before Lillian could respond, Daniel stepped into the room, unable to wait any longer. His eyes locked onto Elliot's, and the old man's breath hitched. "Why did you save me?" Daniel's voice trembled, barely a whisper. Tears welled in Elliot's eyes. "Because you reminded me of my own son," he whispered, his voice breaking. "The one I lost in a fire." The silence between them grew heavy, filled with unspoken pain and memories. Elliot's hands trembled as he leaned forward, his gaze never leaving Daniel's face. "I wasn't even supposed to be there that night," Elliot began, his voice rough with emotion. "I was driving home from visiting my sister when I saw the flames. They were so high." His eyes closed, lost in the memory. "I didn't wait for backup. 20 years of training told me every second counted." Daniel sank into the chair, across from him, clinging to every word. The smoke was thick, but I heard crying. "Upstairs, I found you huddled in a corner, wrapped in a blanket. You were so small, so scared, just like—" His voice broke. "Just like my Tommy had been." "What happened after?" Daniel asked softly. "I got you out, but part of the roof collapsed. It hit me hard." Elliot touched the back of his head. "When I woke up, I was different, confused. The doctors called it trauma-induced amnesia. I couldn't remember my name, my life, just fragments. The guilt of not knowing if I could have saved more people." His voice wavered. "I couldn't face anyone, so I walked away. Spent years drifting, trying to piece myself together." Daniel wiped tears from his cheeks. "You saved my life," he whispered. "All these years, I never knew who to thank." Lillian stepped forward, holding the puppy she'd brought with them. "Mr. Grayson, Do you remember anything about a dog from that night? Elliot's eyes focused on the small brown puppy, and something flickered across his face. Recognition, perhaps. Then his eyes went wide. Lucky, he muttered, the name falling from his lips like a prayer. Daniel's hand flew to his mouth, his eyes widening. The name triggered something deep within him, a memory buried beneath years of trauma. His breath hitched, emotions overwhelming him. Lucky was my dog, Daniel said, his voice cracking. He didn't make it out that night, did he? Elliot shook his head sadly. I heard barking, but the smoke was too thick. I had to get you out first. His gaze shifted to the puppy. But this one, the resemblance is remarkable. Daniel's fingers trembled as he stroked the puppy's soft fur. The memories flooded back. His childhood home, the warmth of Lucky's fur, his mother's voice calling them both for dinner. It can't be a coincidence, Lillian said softly. This puppy finding you, having the same markings. Maybe. Lucky's bloodline continued all these years waiting to find its way back to you. Daniel's chest tightened, his voice trembling. After all this time, you found your way back. A golden retriever named Charlie, Lillian's voice caught slightly. He was the gentlest soul I'd ever known. After the accident that took James, Charlie waited by the door every day. He couldn't understand why James wasn't coming. Home. She paused, taking a shaky breath. When Charlie passed away 6 months later, I couldn't bear to open my heart to another pet. It felt like losing them both all over again. So you chose to help other people's animals instead, Daniel said, understanding dawning in his eyes. Lillian nodded, wiping away a tear. It was safer that way. Or so I thought. The puppy stood up, moving between them, pressing its nose first against Daniel's hand, then Lillian's. Its presence seemed to bridge the space between their shared pain. You know what's strange? Daniel said, watching the puppy. All those years of feeling lost, and here comes this little guy leading me right back to where I needed to be, back to who I really am. Lillian smiled softly, finally allowing herself to pet the puppy's head. Maybe that's what healing looks like. Not forgetting the past, but finding the courage to move forward. The clinic was quiet now, the last rays of sunlight painting the walls in warm gold. Daniel watched as the puppy settled contentedly between them, its mission seemingly accomplished. Do you think Lucky came back for me? Daniel asked quietly. Or for both of us? Daniel stood in Lillian's clinic, adoption papers spread across the counter before him. His hand trembled slightly as he held the pen, unable to make the final signature. Lucky sat patiently at his feet, tail wagging with gentle encouragement. What's wrong? Lillian asked softly, noticing his hesitation. Daniel's voice was thick with emotion. After everything, after abandoning him the first time, do I deserve this second chance? Lillian reached into her white coat pocket and pulled out a small box. I got something for you both, she said, placing it on the counter. Open it. Daniel carefully lifted the lid, revealing a shiny new collar. The metal tag caught the morning light, and he read the freshly engraved text, Lucky on one side and finally home on the other. Because that's what you both are now, Lillian explained, her eyes warm with understanding. Home. Daniel lifted the collar with trembling fingers, the weight of its meaning heavy in his hands. Lucky sat perfectly still as Daniel knelt down beside him, carefully unfastening the old worn collar. Thank you for finding me, Daniel whispered to the puppy, his voice cracking slightly. As he began to fasten the new collar, Lucky let out a small, excited bark. The puppy suddenly pawed at its old collar, which lay forgotten on the floor. There was an odd clicking sound as Lucky's nail caught something, and a tiny panel popped open, a hidden compartment they'd never noticed before. Daniel's breath caught as a small, charred photograph fluttered to the floor. The edges were burned and yellowed with age, but the image remained clear. A smiling family gathered on a sunny porch. A young boy, Daniel himself, sat cross-legged on the steps, arms wrapped around a golden retriever that could have been Lucky's twin. That's my family," Daniel whispered, carefully lifting the fragile photograph. "And that's the original Lucky." His fingers traced the faces of his parents, preserved in this unexpected time capsule. All this time, he was carrying this, waiting to bring it back to me. Tears spilled down his cheeks as he looked at Lucky, who pressed his wet nose against Daniel's hand. The puppy wasn't just a descendant of his childhood dog. He had been carrying the last piece of Daniel's lost home, guarding it until the right moment. Lillian knelt beside them, her own eyes glistening. "Some things are meant to find their way back to us," she said softly, watching as Lucky nuzzled closer to Daniel, the new collar gleaming around his neck. Daniel held the photograph close to his heart, his other hand buried in Lucky's fur. In this small, precious moment, the broken pieces of his past finally began to heal. Daniel's feet crunched slowly over the gravel as he approached. "Lucky," he called softly. The puppy didn't move, just watched him with those knowing eyes. In that moment, surrounded by the remnants of his past and the reality of his present, Daniel felt something shift within him. Lillian stood back, watching as Lucky finally rose and walked over to Daniel, pressing against his legs in that familiar, comforting way. The puppy gazed up at his owner, and in those bright eyes lay a simple truth. Some things were meant to stay exactly where they belonged. Daniel lowered himself to the damp grass, his fingers brushing through the overgrown weeds where his childhood home once stood. Lucky pressed against his side, warm and steady like an anchor holding him in place. The cool night air carried the sweet scent of wild honeysuckle that had overtaken the abandoned lot. "You knew exactly what you were doing, didn't you?" Daniel whispered to Lucky, who looked up at him with those intelligent eyes. The puppy's tail wagged slowly, deliberately, as if confirming what Daniel was, finally beginning to understand. Lillian stood a few feet away, her hands tucked into her jacket pockets, watching the connection between man and dog grow stronger with each passing moment. She could see the tension leaving Daniel's shoulders, as though a heavy weight was being lifted. "All this time," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "I thought I needed to leave to find myself, but I was already found, wasn't I?" He scratched behind Lucky's ears, earning a contented sigh from the puppy. Henry approached cautiously, his footsteps careful on the uneven ground. The older man's face was lined with hope and worry, a father's concern etched into every feature. Daniel looked up at the night sky, stars twinkling above the empty lot where his life had both ended and begun. Lucky nuzzled his hand, and in that simple gesture, everything became clear. "We're not leaving, are we?" Daniel asked Lucky, though it wasn't really a question anymore. The puppy barked once, soft and sure, as if saying, "Finally." With trembling fingers, Daniel pulled out his phone. The number for the Seattle company was already dialed, waiting for his final decision. He pressed the call button, and in the quiet night air, everyone could hear the ring. "Hello, Mr. Hayes," a crisp voice answered. "Are you ready to discuss your start date?" Daniel's voice was steady, his words filled with certainty. "Actually, I'm calling to decline the position. I've realized my home is here. Thank you for the opportunity." The call ended, and Daniel felt lighter than he had in years. He looked up to see Henry beaming, tears glistening in his uncle's eyes. "You're staying?" Henry asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm staying," Daniel confirmed, rising to his feet. "This is where I belong." Lillian watched the scene unfold, feeling something warm bloom in her chest. It was hope, pure and unexpected, filling spaces she had thought would remain empty forever. Lucky bounded between them all, his tail wagging furiously in celebration. Daniel walked to his truck, grabbed his packed suitcase, and tossed it aside. With a laugh, he knelt down, wrapping his arms around Lucky in a tight embrace. "Thank you," he whispered into the puppy's fur. "Thank you for bringing me home." The seasons changed, painting the small town in autumn colors as Daniel Hayes settled into his new life. Henry Bennett's house, once quiet and filled with memories of loss, now echoed with the sounds of hammering and sawing. Daniel spent his weekends helping his uncle renovate, turning the dusty spare bedroom into his own space. Lucky followed Daniel everywhere, his paws pattering across newly laid hardwood floors. The puppy had grown bigger, but his devotion remained unchanged. Sometimes he would sit and watch Daniel work, head tilted as if supervising every repair. Lillian stopped by often, bringing coffee and sometimes staying to help. There was something different in the way she and Daniel looked at each other now. Gentle glances that lingered, shared smiles that held unspoken words. Their friendship had grown into something deeper, though neither seemed ready to name it. One crisp morning, as Daniel stood at the edge of his old property, an idea took root. The overgrown lot had haunted him for so long, but now he saw possibility where there was once only pain. "What if," he said to Lillian, who stood beside him, "we turned this into something beautiful? A garden, maybe, for Mom and Dad and my sister." Lillian's eyes softened. "A memorial garden?" "Yeah." Daniel nodded, his voice growing stronger with conviction. "With benches and flowers, a place where people could come to remember their own loved ones too." The idea spread through the town like wildfire. Soon volunteers began showing up with tools and plants. Henry brought his old landscaping equipment, and local businesses donated supplies. Even Tom Reynolds, the retired firefighter, came with his grandson to help clear the land. They worked together under the autumn sun, transforming the abandoned lot day by day. Where charred ruins once stood, rose bushes now took root. Along winding paths, they planted maple saplings that would one day grow tall and strong. Lucky supervised it all, darting between workers with excited barks as if he understood the significance of what they were creating. Sometimes he would dig alongside the volunteers, his enthusiasm making everyone laugh. Daniel watched it all with a full heart. This wasn't erasing the past, it was honoring it in a new way. Each flower planted was a memory preserved. Each path laid was a story remembered. Would you like me to proceed with the rest of the story in this style?